Welcome, fellow humans. This is JDM Tech LLC with a new video on how to take care of your CV carburetors, or for that matter, any carburetor like this that is on, you can find on modern dirt bikes, quads, motorcycles, not so much modern motorcycles, they've gone more fuel injected, but you can find this on up through, I would say, like the mid 2000s. You can find some bikes that were still carbureted. Hopefully this video will accomplish its goal. I'm going to try to make it short. The original first take was like over an hour and 20 minutes long. That's way too long. I'm trying to stuff way too much into one video, so I'm going to go a little fast. But if you guys have any questions at all, ask them, comments, ideas of how to do things differently than what I'm saying. It may help somebody out there, so go ahead and post it. Don't worry about my feelings. They've already been hurt every day. So anyway, before you take these carbs off the bike, obviously you got to get a couple things done. You got to strip the bike down. You got to have all the plastics off the bike, or at least what you need at the front to get the tank out. Let's say that, not all the plastics. This one didn't have any plastics because they chopped the tail off it and tried to do some custom stuff to it. So anyway, we just put this engine in it for the customer, and now we're going through the carburetors for him. So once you get the plastics off and you get the tank up and out of the way, remember you're going to be dealing with fuel. This is for your entertainment purposes only. If you choose to smoke a cigarette while leaking fuel out of a motorcycle, and standing in a puddle while there's a downed wire, I mean, if you do anything like that, that's your fault, okay? Use your brain. Take care of your safety. Have a fire extinguisher on hand, safety glasses. Just think about your general safety, okay, when you're doing this stuff. Okay, so when you take the carburetors off, obviously you're going to have to take a couple cables loose, right? This one is your throttle cable. You're going to want to make sure that that's not sticking or binding or fraying or anything like that in between here. We've already lubricated this cable, as you can tell. And then also the choke cable as well. You're going to have to release those things. Make sure that they work properly, okay? Both of them. Test everything out real good. And you'll be having to readjust when you put it back together anyway. So just take your adjustment all the way to its loosest point up here. All right. So once you pop the carbs out, well, before you do that, you got to loosen these clamps here too, okay? And then there'll be the ventilation lines that come out with it. That'll go like way down in here, and you may have to, take loose some little clamps and stuff to pull all that out. It's much easier than it sounds. Just take your time, look at it, take it out carefully, and then try to drain the carburetors into an acceptable container for gasoline, okay? Now, there is another method of draining, which is these screws on the bottom. So when you put your float bowls back on, you want to make sure that you put them on correctly so that you have your fuel screws facing outward. So as you can see, that wasn't exactly set up right. So let's put this the way it belongs. Okay, so we can show you what we're talking about. Something like that. So that those two are accessible from one side of the bike and these two are accessible from the other side of the bike. Okay, now flipping the carbs over, this is upside down. You're looking at them here. This is how they would normally face in the motorcycle. And then here is the top half where your CV slides go in. You could tell I took out the slide bodies as well because I wanted to take out the emulsion tubes, okay? So let's go over and talk about the parts real quick first, okay? So here's your CV slide caps. Here's your CV slide itself. Here's an O-ring that's really important that seals off your carb synchronization port, okay, or your vacuum checking port. And here's a carb synchronization tool. We'll get to that in a little bit. But really important that when you take that cap off, you make sure if there's any O-ring or anything like that there, you catch it. So somewhere clean to work and something that is high contrast so you can see things like that is really important, okay? And not working on a shelf or anything overhead while you got this stuff all opened up down here. It's, paramount. Even one human hair getting in here can hold that float needle open and cause that carb to flood. So keep that in mind. Be clean about how you're working on this. Okay, so once we take the caps off, there will be a long spring in here. Let's see if we can show you. This is old parts. This stuff's going away because one of these springs was actually broken in half. And someone installed that. Can you believe it? So I have new springs going in instead of 4. That's why this was over there. But okay, you can see how that spring interacts there. And then you have this little washer that sits on top of your needle. Okay, and that needle plays a very important role. So that washer sits there. And then the needle inside of the washer. Okay, right here. And then this goes in like this. So this is what the whole assembly looks like upside down. Okay. When you flip that over and you put it on top of the carburetor here, the needle comes down inside of this body here. And what it does is it goes down inside of this, what they call the emulsion tube. All right. And when this goes down inside of here, the further it goes down, the needle's tapered. The less of the mixture it allows to come out of the hole at the top there into the throat of the carburetor to mix with the air. Now, the way this works is picture a straw. Here, I'll help you picture a straw. Right here. And let's bend the straw. We bent it. Now it's got 2 nice little holes in here. And we're trying to drink soda that's like all the way down here. Okay, so as we suck on the straw, we're going to get air coming through these little holes mixing with the soda. And it's going to be bubbles, you know, more bubbles in the soda than normal. And it's going to be really annoying to try to drink it. Fortunately, that's exactly what we want right here. So our straw has calibrated holes in it. That's the emulsion tube. Okay, and then the main jet screws in to the bottom of the emulsion tube. Okay, some carburetors on dirt bikes and stuff like that, they don't have a CV slide. Okay, the slide is the throttle. So the throttle cable connects directly to the top of that slide. And there is no throttle butterfly like what we have in these carbs here. Okay, you guys see the throttle butterfly down in there. So this lesson will apply to those type of carburetors as well. So, just so you guys know. But as that tapered needle comes up out of there, more fuel is allowed to get pulled up through here and more air pulled in through these little holes. The air that comes through those little holes actually comes straight through here, through a casting, all right, through a channel casted in the body, and it meets up with this part here, okay, where the emulsion tube is contained, and there's space all around it. So the air and fuel mix in there and pull up and come out of the main bore right there in the middle, okay? Now, the idle circuit works similarly. Here's where the air goes in for the idle circuit, okay? And then the fuel comes in right here through the pilot jet, okay, which is where most people will have their trouble when they can't start their bike or it doesn't idle right or something like that. It's been sitting for a while. Usually that pilot jet is clogged up. So there's your pilot jet right there. So let's put our main jet back over here where it goes because we don't want to have things mixed up and lost. But some of these pilot jets will have holes in the side of them too. Okay, they're not all smooth like this one is. Don't over tighten your jets when you go back together. Okay. This is your low range, so like your lower RPM, okay? This works hand in hand with this guy here, the pilot jet, okay? This adjusts how much of that mixture. So just like how this needle adjusts how much of that mixture comes out of the emulsion tube based on throttle demand and vacuum, which I'll get back over to that in a second. These guys right here, this needle controls how much of that mixture is produced by this jet and this jet, okay? So air comes in here, fuel goes up through here and comes through this one, and then this needle right here will control how much of that actually comes out into the throttle bores. Now, this is going to be a little bit difficult to see. Let's see if I can get you guys to see this. This carburetor seems to have more light going into it. But if we zoom into it right there a little bit and get that focus going. Okay. You see those 3 little holes down there? I don't know if you guys can make it out, but there's 3 little holes. There's 1, 2, and 3. So as you open the throttle, let's say at idle, you'll only have a little bit of the first one showing. Then as you open it, you get the second and the third one, and then you're over to the main jet. Okay? And the needle, the main needle. So in the low range, you're using that small stuff. Then you go to the bigger stuff, okay? That's important to know for tuning it later. So we get our fuel coming through here, and then our screw that adjusts how much flow is coming out, which as I showed you, it comes out through those 3 holes down in there, okay? It's really important to know with that screw how to set it. A lot of people don't know. What you do is before you even take it out, here, let's drop one in there, and I'll show you guys. There's a washer and there's also an O-ring and a spring. So the way it goes is spring, washer, and then the O-ring on top, okay? That allows you to tighten this in without damaging that O-ring. And then the O-ring is allowed to push up against the carburetor body and seal. Now, if you look at this tip, it is very, very small, okay? So when this is installed, what you're looking at is this. There might be like a tin cap or something, or an aluminum cap stuffed in to this hole where the screw goes in, and you won't be able to see it. So you can pierce that and then take it out of there if you got to clean carbs like that. I always advise taking them out, but then you have to know how to set them. So watch this video to the end and you will know how to set these and the methods used to set them and the tools used. Okay, you can mark them and put them right back where they were. So let's say you're looking in the hole and you see that the screw is like this. Mark it right up here like you see that little mark I made, okay? And you know where it was at, okay? Then what you want to do is using a screwdriver, okay? You want to very carefully screw that in and count the turns. So let's start, say we start there, we go around, that's only half a turn. We come back around to where we started, that's a full turn, okay? So this one was 1.5 turns until it was seated. Now you want to very ever so lightly seat it, turn it till it stops. Do not put any pressure on it at all. You will mess up that needle tip and you will mess up the seat inside the carburetor. So it is just a light seating, okay? And then you know, okay, I've turned this thing 1 3/4 of a turn to close it. Now you can just fully remove it. And then you're able to clean the carburetor more effectively. Now when you put it back in, you lightly seat it. And then you back it out 1 3/4 turn. And then you match it up to your mark that you made. Don't use marker, because when you use a carburetor cleaner or you dip the carburetor, you will actually take that mark right off and you'll be, wondering where exactly it was. So, and also write it down for each carburetor. Use a Sharpie and write it right here in front of each one and take a picture so you remember which way you had it facing, okay? So, I don't want to scatter all my parts everywhere here. I took it apart earlier. Like I said, the first take was a bit longer than it should have been. I'm replacing most of this stuff with new, but still, I'd like to give my customer back all their old parts. Okay. So, these are cheap jets. Don't use those. Use genuine. This is a Mikuni carb. If you got a Cayenne, use genuine parts. Contact these guys. Jets R Us. Some other stuff you might need for carbureted bikes. Factory Pro. They make a really great bunch of tools and stuff for some of these older carbureted bikes. Check them out. Really great resources to have. All right. So, let's talk about these slides some more real quick. All right. The way these slides work is on vacuum. When I put this slide in the carburetor, it's pretty much going to sit in like this, okay? And then that cap is going to be on top of it, and it's going to create a seal, okay? So that creates a sealed area above this, okay? And remember, our spring is in there, okay? So the spring returns it for us, all right? And our needle goes down inside of here. Now, as that wasn't what I was trying to do, but hey, you know what? Accidents happen, especially when you're trying to film with one hand and work stuff with the other. Anyhow, moving on. As you apply throttle, this slide will move up because the engine is going to suck the air down through the slide, through these little holes, okay, out of this area up here, okay? So when you suck the air out of this area up here, this slide moves up against its spring, okay? So then what happens is the needle comes up out of the emulsion tube and allows more fuel and air into the engine, all right? Now, there's also a vent hole underneath this slide so that it doesn't build vacuum underneath as it moves up, okay? Now, let me show you guys how it fits into the engine, because some people might be looking at this going, huh? What is he talking about? Okay. So let's just put this one in here. Let's try to at least. Okay. So that's in there. Okay. And the emulsion tube went down in there, and that's where your main jet will now screw in to the threads in that emulsion tube. Okay. Your needle, your spring, and all that good stuff goes in here. Okay. And then gets installed into here. I'm not going to put the needle and all that in right now, but you see how it sits in there. So here's your above chamber. And then when you put your cap on, don't forget there's an O-ring that goes here. Look out for stuff like that when you pull them apart. So once this is on, now you see that you have a sealed area above it, okay? So the air gets vacuumed out by the engine, and this gets moved up against the slide, all right? Thereby increasing how much fuel comes out of that main jet, all right? Now, what you need to understand is you don't need to put a bunch of lubrication on here because dirt will stick to it, even though you have air filters. Little bits of dirt get through still. It'll stick to it, and it'll actually cause it to bind. If you have a broken spring or you have a mixture issue, don't go trying to stretch your springs. That's a bad idea, and that's not going to be good for its calibration long term. Okay, now, what I wanted to tell you guys additionally about these slides is some jet kits, they want you to drill these holes bigger to allow that air to come out of it faster so that the vacuum pulls this slide up faster, okay? I don't really like doing that, especially on older carbs, because this stuff's kind of brittle and you can easily crack one of those, so be real careful about that. All right, so once you get the fuel drained out of it, a word of advice, make sure you get this stuff out before you go spraying carb cleaner, because these wrinkle up and you can really mess them up like that. So don't spray a bunch of carb cleaner on this stuff. Just wipe them down clean, very gentle with it, and keep them away from where they're going to get sprayed with stuff. Another thing to know is that you don't want to put a bunch of air pressure up through any of these ports or anything like that, because you don't want to damage that gentle diaphragm there. You can see up here where the air comes in under the diaphragm, so that as the diaphragm raises, it has somewhere to take air in and also expel air as it moves back down. Because remember, up above is a sealed chamber that's being vacuumed out through here to create the movement upwards. Also, when you open your choke, you actually will take a little air in from up here too. There it is. You see that? And you see how you can see light down there? And then you can't. Now you can. Now you can't. See my finger? There's a hole down there, and this is where your choke air comes from, okay? So it bumps up your idle, okay? And your choke fuel comes through here. Well, let's start off where it really starts. It's right down there on the side, that little jet, okay? And it goes up through there, and then it comes up through here, okay? And meets up in the choke valve with that air. Sorry about that noise, you guys. And then that rich mixture then comes out of this hole right over here, okay? And that bypasses your throttle, so it doesn't matter how low your idle is set or whatever. When you open up that choke, okay, and remember, you can vary how much that choke is open. So as the bike warms up, it's not like you have to just give it full choke and then turn it off. If it stalls because you only ran it 15 seconds with the choke on, that's your fault. That's not the bike's fault. So let's say you got full choke, then you go to 3/4 choke, then you go to half choke, then you go to quarter choke. Once you get to like half choke and you run it for a few minutes, not even a few minutes, maybe 30, 40 seconds, the engine starts to warm up, you should be able to turn the choke all the way off, and the bike should be able to maintain its own idle. Let it continue to warm up from there and build up its oil pressure a little bit and get oil distributed all throughout the engine, okay? Besides that, going into disassembly, when you're taking out these screws, be careful. Use the right size screwdriver to take them out. If not, you're going to end up doing some wizardry, like, you know, cutting turning a Phillips head into a flathead by way of a hacksaw blade or something like that. So, you know, or using some heat. Be careful if you're using heat, though, because you don't want to use an open flame near carburetors that still have fuel in it. You could have a fire hazard on it, you know, on your hands there. So be very careful about that. Make sure you have ventilation. I usually open that door and run that big fan up there. And that gives me plenty of air coming through here and moving across the bench and across the top of the toolbox. I don't usually do this on top of my toolbox, but I have all this set up for you guys too. So we're over here for right now. So disassembling. I got a lot I want to tell you guys, and I don't want to get it all mixed up here. But if I did and you guys have questions, drop them in the comments, and I will get back to you. I will definitely help you. So don't worry about that. So like and subscribe. Anyway, going into disassembly. These things are brittle. Be careful. Not a lot of carburetors I've seen have this little cage attached to the float. Usually you'll just have two little risers that stick up right here and a hole, and then there'll be a pin that runs through. Sometimes that pin's kind of sticky, so be careful. You don't want to beat the crap out of it and break one of those risers off. It's really better to just warm it up a little bit if you have to, or pre-treat it with some PB Blaster for a few days, and then warm it up just to wipe it down, get all the excess off of it, and then warm it up a little bit. If you have to, turn the carbs on their side and put something to support that ear, and then use something real small on this end and tap it lightly until you get that pin to work its way out. A lot of times you could just push a little pocket screwdriver or something in there, a little tiny like sunglasses screwdriver, and it'll pop that pin right out, and then the float can come off as well as the needle. But in this case, they've got the needle seat, which is that big round thing with the O-ring on it, and the needle, all of it is like incorporated into this little assembly. Now, even one human hair inside there, you can see the needle down there in the middle, is going to hold that open enough that this carb is going to flood. So be very careful and clean about how you're working with this stuff. So what I did was I took this out, okay? This had a little plug right there. Okay, not a lot of carburetors have this as well, but we're replacing this because look at how loose these are. Very loose and don't do anything. But this is basically all there was to it. It's just that. Your main jet right there. Obviously, my pilot jet went in right underneath there. So I took this out. I took out my main jet with a flathead, which is this one right here. Okay. I took out my pilot jet with a flathead, which goes, like I said, under that little plug. Goes right in here. Okay, so you use a small flathead. You don't need to really tighten down on these things super tight when you go back together because you can damage it. It's all made of brass. It's really small, light stuff. You're not tightening down a control arm on a 45-foot bus or anything. So just take it easy with how you're working with this stuff. Again, this stuff's going to be brittle, so take it easy. Work it back and forth to pull it out. When you put your new O-rings on here, be really careful. Use a small pick or something, or one old O-ring that you cut and use it and kind of floss them on there with a light oil. Or I like to use this stuff called assembly glue. I'm going to show it to you. Okay, this is it's kind of tacky, but it keeps things in place too, so I like it. I just use a little watercolor paintbrush and just make sure you don't got any you don't have any loose bristles falling in and contaminating stuff. Okay. When you're going back together. So I lubricate my O-rings, I lubricate the holes that they're going into, and then I'm able to just pop that right in there, and I know it's going to seal, and I know it's clean, okay? Now, the other thing is, when you're assembling, they have screwdrivers that have a little notch cut out in the center so that you don't damage the hole in the jet. That's pretty, you have to be really careful about that because you're metering fluid and air to a very precise level here in these carburetors. So you want to make sure that you use genuine jets and you don't scratch them up. So just to give you an example, this one we kind of like just shaved a little notch in it, but it works. All right, doesn't hurt anything, and it takes them out every time. Okay, you can do it to smaller ones, or you can actually buy the proper tool. There's so many tools available now online for this stuff that are like super cheap. So, okay. So we got all this stuff. We got the float bowl out. We got the float itself out. We got the pilot adjustment screw. we got the pilot, the main jet, and this little plug, okay? Now, one of the key things people mess up on when it comes to tuning is they don't set the float bowl height, okay? Use a tool like this. This is by Bike Master. This is a pretty cheap tool, okay? And you measure off the body of the carb to the highest point on the float, okay? The trick is when you take that measurement, okay, and you set it to the factory spec, which this one is like 14 millimeters, I believe. Let's see, where is it? It says it on here somewhere. Oh yeah, there it is. 14 millimeters must do, okay? So they talk about, you know, how to set it for different types of jet kit and using pod filters. So I like to go a little richer when I use pod filters. And it helps because you've taken away the intake air volume. So it's better to go a little richer up on the pilot jets, which I'm going to do. I bought some pilot jets there that are bigger than stock, okay? Again, from these guys, okay? So setting the float height, that's where we were, okay? This is like the foundation of the house, man. If you don't set the float height right, then nothing else is going to be right. The key to setting the float height that a lot of people mess up on is that, let me get this thing to focus in here, but there's a little tang of metal that you bend up or down right there, okay? And that is what sets your float height. So how high the highest point of this float is away from this surface is the float height, okay? Now, that metal tab right there that you see, you bend that and it's very little. You use a flathead screwdriver. It's super little increments to make changes. You have to be very patient there. But if you look really carefully, you'll be able to see that there's a little pin that sticks out of the back of the needle and it's sprung. You see that little spring action that it's got? That's because of that little pin that's sticking out. You do not want to compress that spring in the back of that needle at all. Let me see if I could zoom in a little further. Okay. Let's see if that'll help us see it now. I want you guys to see this very clearly. There's that little pin. I don't know if you guys can see it, but you don't want it compressed like that. Okay? Even like you see the needle stops moving right there. Even that's too far, and then that's compressing the spring. You don't want that. You want it just barely touching that. So when you're setting it, you want to put the carbs on, say, like a 45-degree angle or so. So that way, not even the weight of the float is really compressing it. And then just gently let it sit there and touch. Okay? Then you check the float height. That's how you set it. Takes a little patience, but it's worth it when the bike runs good when you're done. All right? You're going to feel like a champ. Okay? So again, be careful with that. Be careful with setting your float height. Your pilot adjustment screw, be careful with that. Okay? Now, we'll talk about how to get that set and dialed in better than it was when you took the carbs apart. Now, if these were only in 1.5 turns and the manual says 3 turns out, then obviously somebody messed with this that didn't get it back in there right. So you got to take a look at your manual, dig around online. You can find a lot of free info on carburetors online. And you can find the info for your specific model or type of carb. All right, let me zoom back out. So we set the float height correctly. Let's say we got a jet kit. We installed our main jet. Let's say we're putting on pod filters. We're going to install our pilot jet. That's going to be a little bit richer, okay? But before we even get back to like really reassembling this thing, how are you cleaning it, you know? One single carburetor, it's pretty easy to remove all the plastic and rubber and just have it down to a bare metal carburetor, and you can actually boil them in a pot of water. Suspend them so they're not sitting on the bottom of the pot and really getting way too hot. Suspend them with a piece of like stainless steel wire or something, or coat hanger in the pot, and do it outside in the backyard, like on a barbecue grill with a burner. You know, you just let it boil in the water for a few minutes and then take it out. Be real careful. Obviously, it's going to be hot and you could blow it out. In this case, what we did was we just put it in the chem dip for about an hour. You know, just set it in there like that. Actually, no, it was more like 2 hours on each side, because we did 2 carbs and then we flipped it over and did the other 2 carbs. It was deep enough to basically submerge 2 carbs. Then after that, you take it out and you let, most of it drain back in there because you want to keep it. And then you actually spray it out with high pressure water from like the garden hose or something like that. Obviously, don't do it on your grandma's flowers because she's going to really kick your ass if you do that. I'm going to have to probably bleep that out. Anyway, once you've done that and you spray it out with the water, the next thing you want to do right away is blow it out with air. Now look at it and look at the casting, and you can see all the different passages. Make sure you blow everything out. When you think you're done, you're not. Do it again. Okay? Trust me on this. Especially all these little passages. This one, luckily, they actually have a nice way of being able to get to the idle low-speed passages right there. See them? But other than that, a lot of carbs you have to go through here. You have to hold the throttle open just a little bit, and you can blast it with some carburetor cleaner and some air after that, and you can get those little holes clean, because most of the time, like I said, your clogs exist on the pilot circuit after you let fuel sit in there for about 30 days without it running. So use some fuel stabilizer if your bike sits a lot. That's a real good tip. All right. So soaking it is one way. Spraying it out, I do both, and I spray it out with water in between. So dip it, then I take it out, spray it out with water and air, then I hit it with the spray, and then I hit it with the air again. All right, this compressor does like almost 150 psi, so it's pretty good. It works. And then I just use a blowgun, which is somewhere around here. Here it is. Okay, don't put air pressure into your skin. It can kill you. Don't do that. Be careful. All right, safety glasses with all this stuff, gloves, be careful. All right. The other thing, when you're reassembling it in this, be very careful with these fittings in between here if you're not going to separate the carbs. You don't want to disturb the sink if it's already all done and you are just putting it back on the same engine. If it's going on a different engine, you should sink it again, okay? Some people like to separate the carbs completely. If you're doing a full restoration or some kind of crazy build, you can replace the throttle shaft seals that are inside there as well. Okay, the dip doesn't really harm that stuff, but boiling it will. So be careful about that. And then don't touch your synchronizing screws if you don't have to. So there's one in between here, one here, and then one there. Very important that you don't mess with those if you don't have to, if you're not separating the carburetors. If this is going on a different engine, which it is in our case, we will have to synchronize these carbs to that bike, to that specific engine. So, or let's say they're just way off or you messed with them. You can do a bench sync using a needle like a feeler gauge. So you get it to where these carbs are just open enough, right? You look for the one that's the most closed, and you get that one open just enough to use a sewing needle like that, and then barely feel some drag pulling it out from underneath that throttle plate. And then you adjust the sync screws to be able to feel that same drag from each one. And then you'll know that all four are now in bench sync. That's not a dynamic sync. Dynamic sync is done using a tool like this or a fluid manometer, which measures the vacuum on each cylinder, and then you can adjust it to match. Okay, and the way you would adjust, you would match two together. Okay, so we'd get the vacuum to be the same on these two, then on these two, and then we would match both pairs together in the middle with that screw. Okay, pilot screw setting. Okay, in this case, a lot of times people can just use one of these, an infrared thermometer, and we can see, that it works. Okay, and we can aim them at the headers. Okay, so you got to have the bike fully warmed up. Same thing for sinking. You got to have the bike fully warmed up, and then you'll aim it at the same position on the headers. But this has header wrap. So what I did, since everything was apart, is I welded onto the flange a little nut that I could screw in this K-type thermocouple, and I got a little reader hooked up to it here. So when I get to tuning, I'm going to set the two outside cylinders to the same and the two inside cylinders just slightly warmer because they're the two inside cylinders, naturally, okay? Some bikes, they have their vacuum port for synchronizing, back here or even underneath here. Make sure those caps are good. Make sure the O-rings behind these intake boots are good and there's no cracking. Make sure your clamps are positioned correctly so you can get 2 screws from this side, 2 screws from that side, okay? Some people use like a little go-kart fuel tank or an auxiliary fuel tank, like an IV bag when you go to the hospital, and they'll supply fuel to the carbs like that so the fuel tank's not in their way. Again, be safe, have a fire extinguisher around, and don't inhale too much fumes. Make sure you got ventilation. Or if you got rafters, you can suspend your fuel tank from the rafters. I wouldn't go too high, you know, obviously, but you need to be able to get under here and work with synchronizing it. And then also hang your sink gauges over here somewhere where you can actually work with it. You know, your setup is key to be able to do this work comfortably and get the proper result from it, okay? And I know not everything is always perfect, but you can try your best and get it pretty close if you're patient and you persevere with it. All right, so we disassembled it. We talked about synchronizing it a little bit, using an auxiliary fuel tank, and I'll show you guys more on the synchronizing here in a second. I just want to catch up with where we should be. So obviously we're going to replace these O-rings going back together. We're replacing the pilot jets. We are replacing this screw. We are replacing, obviously, its O-ring and washer and its spring. We're replacing all that. These little plugs we have new. We're putting new springs in, so let's get rid of this. Then we have new needles to go in, actually. And I will show you guys those here in a second. And the difference compared to a factory needle. Well, the older needles actually had multiple points for where you can put this little external, this little C-clip in place, or E-clip actually is what, no, this one's a C-clip. The E-clips have the little dot in the middle too, but basically you can adjust how high this needle sits in the slide, but they kind of took that away from us, I guess, due to emissions, right? So let's put this in the old parts box. So what we've got here is a new needle from my boys over at Factory Pro. These guys, and have a really nice carb tuning guide, which we'll get into here in a minute. But you can see now, not only do we have the adjustable point to be able to set our needle height, but we also have a way different profile on this needle. Look at the difference, especially on the higher end. When this needle starts to really get up out of the bore, you can see it really slims down over here versus that stock needle. So you can see it's definitely going to be delivering more fuel, okay? Regardless of the main jet, just that alone is going to make a huge difference in fuel delivery and power, okay? Also, the adjustment screws for the low speed and cruise, we got these long boy screws, and as you can see, they're, you know, much longer than the stock ones, so you're able to get in there and adjust them just by hand. With these original ones, they're kind of recessed in here, and you need a special 90-degree screwdriver that's got a flexible drive in it, sort of like this, and that allows you to get in, reach, and they're pretty long too, and you can reach and make those adjustments right there. I think I have one, but you know what? Why go through that when you can do it like this? And also, you got to be careful if you buy a set of these. The spring, washer, and O-ring are down inside the caps. So careful about that. New screws just to put the new caps on top, just to give it a nice finished look. And they're Allen screws, so they don't strip as easily. And then we got 2 different sizes of main jet. And based on your altitude, this guy was at 500 feet in Georgia, and he ran a 125 jet. All right, and then he talks about average temperature. His fuel screws were 3 turns out, and his pilot jet was at 32.5, which is stock. I don't really agree with the stock pilot jet. I have an upsized pilot jet here because of the fact that we're using pod filters. So once you play around with the intake air volume, you get rid of your air box, or you drill holes in it, or anything crazy like that. On a carbureted bike, you got to richen up on those pilot jets. Now, if you're at a higher elevation, then it's lesser of a problem because there's less atmospheric air pressure pushing air into that air filter when the piston sweeps downward and is, you know, calling for more air to come in, right? So depending on where you're at, your jetting, you know, greatly varies by you know, your altitude, the type of fuel you're running, and the type of riding you're trying to do. So keep that all in mind. There's plenty of videos out there on carb jetting and stuff like that too. Don't leave my video just yet because we still got some more stuff here to talk about. But so we talked about disassembling it. We talked about synchronization. We talked about the importance of the fuel level, right? Because let's put this bowl on here, and you know we're gonna look at it upside down. But basically, you know what? Maybe I can flip it at least back like this. The height of that fuel inside the bowl greatly determines the mixture because here's your hole in the side of your straw, like we talked about earlier, where the air is coming in to mix with it. So the further down away from those holes it is, the leaner the mixture is going to be. The higher up, the richer it's going to be. Now, if you got a little hair sticking that needle valve open, it might be pouring gas out of one of these holes because your float is being held open. You know, it's like your toilet tank. If your float wouldn't work in your toilet tank, it would overflow as well. So it can be overflowing out of these hoses right here that connect in between these two carbs, or it can actually come out of here, or you might not even see it at all. And that's even worse because then it's going inside your engine. Okay, and that's not good because you're diluting your oil with fuel and washing your oil off of your cylinder walls. That cylinder is going to wear pretty fast. Okay, you want oil on your cylinder walls, not fuel. Okay, part of the reason why diesels last so long. Okay, plus they're, you know, made to withstand a lot more crap too. But you guys get the point. Okay, float bowl height is really important because here's your two straws, and then here's your holes in your two straws. Okay, so the lower that level is, the more air that's coming and the less fuel. The higher it is, you're going to get more fuel. Now, more fuel alone does not necessarily mean more power, especially if you're just dumping raw gas. Okay. The Wright brothers had a 4-cylinder engine in their original plane that made about 8 horsepower. I wasn't there, obviously, but from what I gathered, it was like a raw gas drip onto a hot manifold that would evaporate it and would get sucked in. No wonder it was a 4-cylinder making only 8 horsepower, but I think they did pretty good back then for what they had. Let's give them a round of applause, right? But I only got one hand, so, you know, there it is. That's the best I could do. This is a GX390 Honda block, and these things are making north of 12 horsepower, 13 horsepower stock. Now, if you build one of these, you can get like 30 horsepower out of it. Obviously, advances in cam timing, porting, engine design, a lot of stuff went into being able to make that kind of horsepower out of one cylinder, especially on a race motor making 30 horsepower when it was originally designed for like half of that. Okay, you get the point. Mixture is very important. So it's like 14.7 to 1 is what they call stoichiometric, I guess. Okay, and that is the important thing. All right, raw gas, picture it like a cluster of tennis balls dunked in a bunch of paint, and then we took it out and let it dry. When you rip it apart, you're going to see some of it that's not been touched by the paint. Some of it is going to be still the same color as a tennis ball. Consider that cluster of tennis balls like a big drip of raw gas going into the engine. Okay, that paint is like the flame. Now, the flame can't touch that molecule of gas all the way around, so it can't burn it and consume it fully, right? So what's going to be happening is you're going to be expelling raw, unused fuel out of the exhaust, almost like a two-stroke at low RPM ranges where they're least efficient. They'll actually expel up to like 30% of their fuel in their exhaust gases, which is part of the reason that California wants to, you know, get rid of them, right? Or has been wanting to get rid of all of them. Shoot, now you can't even run a lawnmower out here. But anyway, enough said about that. You know, raw gas does a lot of bad things to the engine. Besides wear, it'll also foul the plugs. Just so you know, when you foul the plug, is a carbon chain that formed, consider it like a wire, up that insulator to the metal body of the spark plug way down inside here, okay? And then the spark doesn't jump the gap, it just travels to ground, the easier way, right? Electricity is like oil pressure, it's lazy. It always goes the path of least resistance. So if you give it a path to escape, it will most certainly escape. And then also, you know, once a plug is fouled, it's fouled. You can clean them up. There's like a sandblasting device old guys used to use. And then there's also, you also have to think about the fact that when these are hot, the metal is porous, expands, and then the gasoline gets trapped inside the metal. And then when it gets cold, it's in there. Then when it heats up, it quits again. So just, think about all that. Replace your spark plugs, fix your carburetors, okay? Don't ride it around. If it's running on 3 cylinders when it's idling, that means something's wrong. And when you rev it up, you got more airflow through the carburetor. It's more than likely going to be in the pilot jet circuit somewhere, but you're still dumping way too much gas into one of those cylinders, or running in lean. And running lean to a certain extent will cause you to run extra hot in that cylinder and cause damage like that too. So anyway, methods of cleaning, like I said, chem dip, boiling it for a single carb works if you're going to take everything apart. Spraying it, using air pressure and also water, right? But if you use water, use air pressure right afterwards and get that thing really dry, and make sure you hit every single passage. There's a hidden one in this one that goes across between from the main jet to the pilot jet because of these little plugs. They actually plug off the pilot jet, and it actually transfers fuel after the main jet over to the pilot jet and then up, okay? So just goes to show you they're trying to restrict, how much you get, how much fuel you can get through that pilot circuit for power and, low-end response to that throttle, okay? For the purposes of emissions, okay? So could you leave that plug out of there? You probably could, but you know what? I'm trying to put it back right and better at the same time. So we got new plugs to go in there because these are way too loose. Okay, so we talked about the taper of this needle. We talked about the float system, the importance of the float height, the slides, how the slides work, the springs, the importance of all that, moving freely and, as consistently across all of them as possible. Remember, the same thing goes for checking the float level. This is the point where you have to be most critical and careful, and you have to get down and really look at it when you're checking that float height with your tool, okay? You want to make sure that it's right, okay? Because that's the foundation. If this were a house, that's the foundation of your house. If you don't do this, you just built your house on sand, okay? Good luck. Good luck getting it running. If, there's people that do stuff like if they have a spout at the bottom for draining the carbs, they'll hook up a clear piece of line and route it up next to the carburetor. They'll go off the float bowl and route it up next to the carb and look at the level and then compare it on all 4 carbs and try to set them like that. I mean, that seems like a lot more work than it's worth, and I've done them like that too when I was younger. I remember one night I was working on a Ninja 1000 set of carbs, an old 86, and I fell asleep out there in my grandmother's backyard in Queens, New York. She woke me up in the morning yelling and screaming at me, "You were out there all night?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was just trying to get these carburetors right." And I woke up, I ate breakfast right there, and I went right back to it. So I was doing that when I was like 17 years old, 18 years old. So there's some experience into what I'm showing you guys here. Hopefully, I know this video is really long and drawn out, and I'm probably bouncing around a lot, but I'm hoping that you're getting what you need. All right, so you got your main circuits, your high speed, your low speed, and you got your starting for your choke. Your choke mixture comes out right here. So your fuel for your choke comes from here, and then up in the top where your slides were, your choke air comes in through here, okay? And it seems kind of weird, but it does go through the air filter before it comes here, okay? And so you can see the choke valve open up right there. Okay, and they're all connected together. And remember, you start off with full choke, then as the engine warms up a little bit, you relieve, and then you relieve some more, and then you shut off. Make sure that this works smoothly, and make sure that they are all the way in, okay, when you are fully off this this handle, okay? And the reason is you don't want one supplying extra fuel, because that's going to, destroy your consistency of your mixture across all 4 carburetors, okay? So we talked about bench sinking, right, with the needle. And okay, so now let's go over here and talk about dynamic sinking and some of the other stuff we got going on over here. But going together, remember what I said, lubricate your O-rings, be gentle, be precise. You bend that little tang to set your float bowl height, okay? Very little. And remember, just touching, okay, not compressing the spring. You definitely don't want to be compressing the spring inside that needle. And I'll go show you guys what that needle looks like over here on a new one right now, so you can really see what I'm talking about. All right. There's your needle right there. And then, it's trying to hide from me now. Look at that. See on the back of it, that little nub sticking right out of the back where that little metal wire clip is? That's what I'm talking about. You don't want to compress that inward this way at all. You just want that metal tang sitting on there, just barely touching. All right. We got all our O-rings and stuff here ready to put these things back together once we're done cleaning them up. Okay. Make sure these holes in the sides of the emulsion tube are clear as well. And it's pretty easy. You don't have to take this whole piece out. A lot of times you can pop out just the emulsion tubes, but I wanted to clean these things all the way out, and I wanted to show you guys everything I could about this. Let's see if we can see. There it is. You could see when you hold them up to the light. Do the same thing with the jets. Hold them up to the light, and you could see light coming through them, and you can be sure that they're clean. All right. So there's some new pilot jets right there. We're not using those. We got bigger ones. We got the long boy screws. We got the needles, like we said. We got new springs. We got pod air filters, but these cover 2 cylinders each. The other one's in there. Obviously, you want to keep stuff like this covered up. You don't want it to have the chance of something falling in here. But I triple check everything. As I'm going together, I triple check everything. There's no screw or nothing stupid, piece of plastic or nothing sitting inside of there because I'm rushing it. And that ain't going to happen. Take your time, do it right. Put proper fuel hose in it, okay? This is good quality Gates hose. This is an AFR meter. I used this on a cart that I built a while back with a race engine, and I used it to help me tune the carb. This is going on another project like that I'm working on for a golf cart. There'll be a video to come on that one too. But you can put this bung, for the O2 sensor on your motorcycle exhaust and install the O2 sensor and use this to help get you in the ballpark with your carb tuning to get your jetting right, in the different ranges, okay? Now, this tuning guide comes with Factory Pro jet kits, and they talk about this stuff like what to start with. Your top end. So you got to select the right main jet first, okay? After 10 to 15 minutes of hard use, that's when you're going to know you've got the right main jet or not. Okay? Then you're going to set the needle clip position, which is mid-range throttle, 5 to 7,000 RPM. Then you're going to go to the low-end throttle, the float height. But the float height does play in with all this other stuff. So that should have been set right from the beginning. But you can mess with the float height a little bit, if you need to change right here, okay, 2 to 3,000 RPM. That's where it's going to make the most difference. However, it definitely does contribute to these other ranges as well, if it's too lean or too rich, okay? So once you get the float height correct, it says that the engine will accept full throttle without missing or stumbling in second gear from 2,500 to 3,000 RPM at a minimum. So that's like you're like just launching that thing like from 2,000 RPM or so, and you just hit that throttle. It should be able to take that and give you a nice clean launch without stumbling or missing at all, okay? So if it like falls on its face and almost shuts off and then starts to bop, 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 and pick up, then that's a lean mixture, okay? So just be careful about, getting it mixed up like rich versus lean, okay? Then after that, it talks about being able to adjust your float height within 1 millimeter or so, up or down, based on, what you're trying to do. And then fuel level is extremely important, right? Because you mess that up, you messed with everything else that we already talked about on this side of the page, okay? And then idle and low RPM cruise, setting the fuel screws properly. The way that we do that, like I said, was with temperature. So we would use this right here. But in this case, they have, header wrap. So I might have already showed you guys this, the K-type thermocouple with the little reader. So we'll use that. We'll set the 2 outside cylinders the same, and then we'll set the 2 inside cylinders the same. A little bit hotter on the inside cylinders, just slightly. Okay. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Let's go over this part right here. It says, note, a rich problem gets worse as the engine heats up. Obviously, because when the engine is cold, it can use a richer mixture. That's why you have choke, right? If the throttle is lightly blipped at idle, the RPM drops below the set idle speed, then rises to the set idle speed. The low-speed mixture screws are probably set too rich. Try a half a turn in to lean out the idle mixture. So you can adjust those idle screws at very slight increments to get it to respond better to what you're doing. But on a 4-cylinder, remember, you have 4 carburetors to do, so you better be pretty close on each one of those, and then fine-tune based on temperature once you've got it all locked in, okay? A lean mixture, I know that one off the top of my head, is, you know, when you come down off the freeway and the RPM seems like it just hangs up a little bit and then slowly settles down into idle, you know, or you blip the throttle and then it hovers a little and then settles down into idle. That's telltale of a lean condition at idle. And when you do all this pod filter stuff, like I said, upsize them pilot jets because you took away your intake air volume. All right. Keep it clean to keep it mean, guys. That's the saying for this video. Keep it clean to keep it mean, because if you let it sit and it gunks up, you're going to be in here again. You're going to be doing this. So use fuel stabilizer. Put a proper fuel filter in line if the bike calls for that. Some bikes have internal filter in the tank, fuel injected bikes especially. You won't be needing any of this advice for a fuel injected bike, but just make sure you don't think you're doing things better than the engineer of the motorcycle, or people that have spent thousands to engineer kits like what these guys have done at Factory Pro for this stuff. All right, I'm not sponsored by anybody. I'm just a front yard guy in my garage. I do jobs for customers on this type of stuff. You know, BMW is my main thing. And I got, you know, a couple other projects over there, a couple quads and go-karts, and we'll get to that stuff later. But if you guys like what you saw, if I helped you out with some info, like, subscribe, drop a comment. You know, I don't care. I got people commenting on videos from Russia and India and all over the place. And, man, you know what? Some of the stuff you guys leave, it's awesome because it helps other guys too. So don't worry about my feelings. If you think there's something better that can be done, by all means, you know, let's hear it in the comments. And before I let you guys go, I just want to real quick touch on the carburetor sinking. The way to do it is you hook up each gauge to one cylinder. So let's hook up all 4 gauges to one cylinder, right? And then we will set these gauges to give us the same exact reading from that one cylinder. We're now zeroed it all, okay? Then we hook up one line to each carb, and we balance 2 carbs to each other, 2 carbs to each other, and then the 2 banks to each other in the middle screw, okay? So you got 1 screw here that you adjust, then you adjust 1 screw over here, and then once you got, let's say this one is at, let's say these are at 20, okay? And then these are at, say, 25, okay? You get these 2 at 25, these 2 at 20, then we'll match them up at, let's say, 20, okay? We'll get them to be where it's within the green, and they're all 4 matching across the board. So now not only are you getting the carbs to have equal flow, but you're also dynamically tuning it to the vacuum that this engine is making. Because you can bench sink them all day. If cylinder 1 makes more vacuum than cylinder 4, well, what is that now? I mean, you're not going to have the same amount of pull on each carb, and so you're actually not going to have the same amount of cylinder contribution on all 4 cylinders to the rotation of that crank. Anyway, before we cross the 1 hour mark, guys, I just want to say I hope this video was helpful. Here's a look at some of the tools and some of the stuff we have laid out here. Thank you for watching. Again, if you have questions, like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate you guys. Take care, and we'll see you next time.